He had always loved the quiet life of his suburban neighborhood. The streets were lined with neat houses, trimmed lawns, and friendly neighbors who nodded when they passed each other. His days started early, with the sun warming the front porch and the sound of birds chirping nearby. But the thing that made his mornings truly special was the soft patting of paws on the wooden floor and the eager eyes of his dog looking up at him. The dog was more than a pet. It was his companion, a constant source of joy and comfort in the ups and downs of life. He remembered the day he first brought the dog home. It had been small, timid, and trembling with fear, but there was something in its eyes that spoke to him. Over time, they had grown inseparable. The dog had a way of sensing his moods, resting its head on his lap when he was sad, and bounding around with energy when he was happy. Life had its challenges, but with his dog by his side, he always felt a little lighter, a little stronger. Everything was peaceful until the letter arrived. At first, he thought it was a mistake. The envelope bore the official seal of the Homeowners Association, and his heart sank as he carefully opened it. The letter was polite, formal, and strangely cold. It stated that his dog violated the community rules. It mentioned vague terms about the dog's size and behavior, suggesting that it was not suitable for the neighborhood. There was a tone of authority that made it clear the matter was serious. He read it twice, then a third time, hoping that somehow the words would change, but they did not. Shock turned into disbelief. He had followed every rule, kept the yard clean, and ensured his dog never caused trouble. Neighbors loved his dog, and it had never bitten anyone, barked excessively, or caused any real disturbance. Yet here he was being told that he might have to give up the one creature that brought him happiness. The thought was unbearable. Days passed, and the sense of unease grew. He kept looking at the calendar, counting down the days until the deadline mentioned in the letter. Every morning he woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream. Every night he went to bed with a knot in his stomach. He tried to talk to neighbors, to see if anyone had faced similar problems, but most people just shook their heads. Some had their own stories of minor HOA disputes, but nothing as personal or heartbreaking. The letter was not just about rules. It felt like an attack on his happiness. He started to attend the HOA meetings, thinking that face-to-face conversation might help. The room was filled with familiar faces, neighbors who seemed friendly enough in passing, now showing a different side. They spoke in formal tones, citing regulations and codes, often looking down at him as though he were the one out of line. He tried to explain his side, talking about his dog's gentle nature, its good behavior, and the joy it brought to the community. Some HOA members nodded politely, but the decision-makers remained unmoved. The rules, they said, were rules, and exceptions were not possible. Frustration began to build. He could not understand how such strict rules could override the love and companionship of a living being. The more he tried to reason with them, the more rigid they seemed to become. Each meeting ended with more tension and less hope. He went home each evening feeling exhausted, sitting with his dog on the couch and wondering how things had come to this point. His dog seemed to sense his distress. It would nuzzle him, resting its head on his knee, offering silent comfort. There were moments when he would watch it sleep, ears twitching with every small sound, and feel a surge of determination. He would not give up easily. The thought of losing his dog was unbearable, and he knew he had to find a way to fight back, even if the rules seemed impossible to bend. He began researching his rights and learning more about the HOA's authority. He discovered that while they had some control over community standards, there were legal boundaries they could not cross. This gave him a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way to protect his dog, to challenge the letter in a way that was fair and justified. He made notes, wrote questions, and began to plan his next steps. Each piece of information was like a small light in the darkness, showing a path forward. In the evenings, he would take long walks with his dog through the neighborhood. The sun would set, casting golden hues over the lawns, and he would think about all the good memories they had shared. He remembered the day the dog had chased butterflies in the garden, the time it had comforted him after a stressful day at work, and the simple joy of its presence at his side. These memories fueled his resolve. He would not be forced to part with his companion. There had to be a solution. He also started talking to a few neighbors he trusted. Some offered advice, others shared stories of minor victories against the HOA. It was comforting to know he was not entirely alone. Even a small show of support made a difference, reminding him that community rules were meant to serve people, not punish them. The thought strengthened his resolve. He could not and would not let bureaucracy dictate such a personal matter. As the deadline loomed closer, he felt a mixture of fear and determination. Each morning, his dog's excited greeting reminded him why he was fighting so hard. He could not imagine coming home to an empty house, without the warmth and energy that had become such an essential part of his life. The thought of leaving the decision in the hands of indifferent officials was unbearable. He needed a plan, a way to turn the situation around before it was too late. Late at night, he would sit at his kitchen table, the letter spread out before him, his dog curled up at his feet. He made lists, wrote ideas, and considered every possible option. He thought about legal action, negotiations, and community support. Nothing seemed simple, and yet giving up was not an option. The love he felt for his dog gave him strength, and the fear of losing that bond only made him more determined. He also noticed small signs of support around him. A neighbor would wave when he walked by. Another would smile as they saw the dog playing in the yard. These small gestures reminded him that not everyone agreed with the HOA's rigid approach. People cared about the joy and companionship that pets brought to their lives. This realization was empowering. He was not alone in valuing the bond between humans and animals. As the part of the story that marked the beginning of his fight drew to a close, he understood one thing clearly. This was bigger than a simple rule violation. It was about standing up for what he loved, about protecting the bond that had brought him so much happiness. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles, but he was ready to face them. For his dog, for himself, and for the principle that love and compassion mattered more than rigid rules, he would not back down. The first part of his journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The days after receiving the letter from the HOA were some of the hardest he had ever faced. Every time he looked at his dog, he felt a knot in his stomach, a mix of fear and determination. The thought that someone could try to take away his companion seemed almost unreal. Yet the letter made it clear that this was happening in real life. He could not ignore it, and he knew he had to fight back. He started by learning as much as he could about his rights. He spent hours online reading articles about HOA rules, community laws, and pet regulations. He discovered that while HOAs had the power to enforce certain rules, there were limits to what they could legally demand. This knowledge gave him a small sense of hope. It was like finding a lifeline in a storm. He began making notes, writing down important points, and thinking about how he could use them to protect his dog. Next, he decided to attend another HOA meeting. He wanted to speak directly to the people making the rules, to try to show them that his dog was not a problem, but a beloved member of his household. Walking into the meeting room, he felt a mix of nerves and courage. The room was filled with people who were used to being in control, who spoke with authority and expected everyone to follow their decisions without question. He knew he would have to be careful, polite, and firm. When it was his turn to speak, he explained calmly how much his dog meant to him. He talked about the long walks they took, the ways the dog brought joy to the neighborhood, and the care he took to make sure it did not disturb anyone. He even shared a few small stories of neighbors who had enjoyed watching his dog play safely in the yard. For a moment, he thought he saw some understanding in a few faces, but the board members remained cold and distant. They repeated the rules and emphasized that exceptions were not allowed. Feeling frustrated, he tried another approach. He asked if there could be a compromise, perhaps a waiver or a small adjustment to make sure his dog complied with the regulations. He suggested extra training or keeping the dog in a specific part of the yard. But each suggestion was met with polite dismissal. The rules, they said, were in place to protect the community, and there could be no exceptions. He left the meeting feeling drained but not defeated. He knew he had to find another way. At home, he found comfort in his dog's presence. The dog seemed to understand the tension, resting its head on his lap as if offering reassurance. He spent time playing and talking to the dog, reminding himself why he was fighting so hard. The bond they shared was not just about companionship. It was about love, trust, and mutual support. Losing that bond was unthinkable, and that thought fueled his determination to find a solution. He began to explore legal options. He contacted a local attorney who specialized in property and community law, explaining the situation and asking for advice. The attorney listened carefully, then explained that the HOA could not simply take his dog away without cause. There were protections in place for pet owners, and there were ways to challenge unreasonable rules. This advice gave him a sense of empowerment he had not felt in weeks. He was not powerless. There were steps he could take, and he was willing to take them. While researching, he also reached out to neighbors who had pets and had experienced conflicts with the HOA. Some were sympathetic, sharing their own frustrations with rigid rules and cold enforcement. Others offered small pieces of advice or encouragement, reminding him that community support could make a difference. It was comforting to know that he was not alone, and that others cared about fairness and compassion. He started keeping a daily record of his dog's behavior, noting that it was well-behaved, friendly, and never caused disturbances. He photographed moments of play, the dog helping a neighbor or simply enjoying the yard peacefully. These records would later serve as evidence that his pet was not a threat and followed all reasonable guidelines. The simple act of documenting life with his dog gave him a renewed sense of control. He was actively preparing to protect the bond he valued so deeply. At the same time, he realized that the fight was not just about rules or legalities. It was about people's perceptions and emotions. He needed the community to understand why his dog mattered, why pets brought joy, and why compassion should be part of any rule. He began talking to neighbors more, sharing stories and letting them see the happiness his dog brought. Small conversations at the mailbox, brief chats during walks, and casual waves across the street slowly built a network of subtle support. Despite all these efforts, the pressure from the HOA remained. Letters continued to arrive, each one formal and intimidating. They reminded him of deadlines, fines, and possible penalties. The stress was heavy, and there were nights when he struggled to sleep. Yet he refused to give in. He reminded himself that giving up would mean losing a part of his life that could never be replaced. Every time he looked into his dog's eyes, he felt a renewed determination. The dog had given him joy for years. Now it was his turn to protect it. He also began imagining creative solutions. He thought about ways to turn the situation around, not just for himself but for the neighborhood. Perhaps there was a way to show the value of animals, to create a positive change rather than simply defending his own pet. He wondered if there were opportunities to engage the community, to create events or programs that could highlight the joy pets bring to people's lives. The idea of turning a conflict into something constructive started to take shape in his mind. He spent evenings planning, sketching ideas on paper, and thinking through each possible step. He knew that patience would be key as well as strategy and persistence. Every small detail mattered, from legal documents to personal interactions with neighbors. He also began practicing how to communicate effectively, ensuring he could convey his message calmly and convincingly even under pressure. Through all of this, his dog remained a constant source of comfort and inspiration. It was more than a companion. It was a reminder of why he was fighting, why he could not give up. The simple moments, playing fetch in the yard, sharing a quiet evening on the couch, watching it sleep peacefully, were powerful motivators. They reminded him that love, loyalty, and friendship were worth standing up for, no matter the obstacles. As the second part of his journey unfolded, he felt a growing sense of determination. He realized that the fight was not just about a letter or a rule. It was about standing up for what mattered most. He had learned to navigate the challenges of bureaucracy, to find allies in the community, and to use knowledge as a tool for protection. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he knew one thing. He would not allow anyone to take his dog without a fight. This realization gave him strength, hope, and a clear sense of purpose. The battle was just beginning, but he was ready to face it head-on. He had spent weeks preparing for every possible outcome. He had legal advice, community support, and a careful record of his dog's behavior. Yet despite all this, he felt that a direct confrontation with the HOA might not be enough. The board was stubborn, focused on rules rather than people, and he realized that to truly protect his dog, he would need a plan that went beyond meetings and letters. One evening, while walking through the neighborhood with his dog, he passed by the old animal shelter on the outskirts of town. The building had been there for years but was now run down and struggling. He had seen it from a distance many times, but tonight it struck him differently. He remembered a story about how many animals were waiting for homes, how volunteers were doing their best but resources were limited. A sudden thought came to him, bold and surprising. What if he bought the shelter? At first he laughed at the idea, thinking it was too big, too risky. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Owning the shelter would give him leverage, not only in dealing with the HOA but also in turning the situation into something positive for the community. It could show the board and neighbors that animals were valuable, that rules could be balanced with compassion, and that he was committed to making a difference. The idea grew in his mind, no longer just a thought but a possible plan. The next morning he started researching the shelter. He learned that it was privately owned and had been struggling financially for years. The owner was getting older, tired, and considering selling, but no one had stepped forward. He arranged a meeting, nervously but determined, to see if it might be possible. Walking into the shelter, he was met with the smell of animals, the sound of barking and meowing, and the sight of volunteers trying to care for too many pets with too few resources. The place was chaotic but full of heart. He spoke with the owner, explaining who he was and why he was interested. The owner listened carefully, perhaps sensing his sincerity. They walked through the shelter together, talking about the challenges, the animals, and the community. By the end of the conversation, a tentative agreement was in place. He would buy the shelter, taking on both the responsibility and the opportunity to make a difference. The thought was thrilling but also terrifying. It was a huge commitment, both financially and emotionally, but he felt it was the right step. Once the purchase was finalized, he spent the next few weeks learning everything about the shelter. He met volunteers, studied the operations, and began to plan improvements. He also continued to work on protecting his dog from the HOA. Now he had something more powerful than letters and meetings. He had a platform, a voice, and a story that could change people's perspectives. Owning the shelter gave him confidence and a sense of control that he had never felt before. He also began thinking strategically about how to use the shelter to influence the HOA. He organized small community events, inviting neighbors to visit, meet the animals, and see the joy that pets brought. Children laughed as they petted puppies, adults smiled at playful cats, and the air was filled with warmth and energy. Slowly he started to change minds, showing that animals were not a threat but a source of happiness. The community began to notice, and support started to build. Evenings were spent at home with his dog, reflecting on the changes. The dog seemed to sense the difference too, more relaxed, more joyful, and more affectionate. Walking together through the neighborhood, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight against the HOA was still there, but it was no longer just about defense. Now it was about creating something positive, something that could benefit not only him and his dog, but the entire community. He also used his new position to raise awareness about responsible pet ownership. Flyers, social media posts, and word of mouth spread the message that pets brought joy, needed care, and deserved respect. The shelter became a hub of activity, with volunteers, neighbors, and even some HOA members visiting to see the positive impact firsthand. The more people engaged, the harder it became for the HOA to ignore the value of pets in the community. Despite these victories, he knew the HOA would not simply give up. They had a history of strict enforcement and rigid rules. He prepared for their next move, thinking through possible scenarios, legal steps, and community strategies. Every step he took was measured and deliberate. The shelter was no longer just a place to rescue animals. It was a shield, a tool, and a statement of his commitment to doing what was right. He also found personal growth through the experience. The challenges forced him to be creative, courageous, and resilient. He learned how to navigate bureaucracy, how to inspire people, and how to stand firm under pressure. Each small success, whether saving an animal, winning a neighbor's support, or organizing a community event, strengthened his resolve. The bond with his dog grew deeper, fueled by shared experiences and the knowledge that they were fighting for each other. As weeks turned into months, the shelter began to flourish under his guidance. Repairs were made, new volunteers joined, and more animals found loving homes. Local media picked up the story, highlighting his efforts and the positive changes in the community. The HOA, once confident in their authority, now face. Through it all, his dog remained his closest companion, a constant reminder of why he had started this journey. Walking through the shelter, playing in the yard, or simply resting together at home, the bond between them was stronger than ever. The dog had not only brought him joy but had inspired him to take bold action, to think beyond immediate problems, and to create meaningful change. By the end of this stage, he had transformed from a man defending his pet against unfair rules into a community figure, an advocate for animals and a symbol of compassion and determination. The shelter was no longer just a building. It was a beacon of hope, a place where love and care overcame obstacles, and in the midst of it all, his dog remained the heart of the story, the reason he had started this journey and the reason he continued to fight. He understood that the real challenge was still ahead. The HOA had not surrendered, and there would be more battles, more obstacles, and more tests of patience and resolve. But with the shelter under his care, community support growing, and his dog by his side, he felt ready. The bold plan he had once thought impossible had become a reality, and he was prepared to face whatever came next. The fight had evolved, from protecting a single dog to creating a better environment for all animals and people in the community, and he embraced it fully. The shelter had become more than just a building. It was a center of life, laughter, and hope. Each day, people came from all over the neighborhood to help, visit, or adopt an animal. The sound of barking and meowing filled the air, but it was a happy noise full of excitement and love. He walked through the shelter each morning, greeting the volunteers, checking the animals, and planning events. His dog followed him everywhere, tail wagging, eyes bright, a constant companion and reminder of why he had started this journey. The community response was growing stronger by the day. People who had never interacted with the shelter before were showing up to volunteer or donate supplies. Children were learning how to care for animals. Adults were inspired to adopt, and even some neighbors who had been indifferent before now stopped to chat and share stories. The shelter had become a place where people connected over a shared love for animals, and his presence as the owner showed that one person could make a real difference. Despite all the positive energy, the HOA had not backed down. They continued to send notices, enforce rules, and try to intimidate him. But the tables had started to turn. With the shelter thriving and the community watching, the HOA faced growing pressure. Public opinion mattered, and people were beginning to see the HOA as rigid and unfair. Their threats felt smaller when weighed against the support he now had from neighbors, volunteers, and even local media. The more they tried to act against him, the more their position weakened. He organized a community adoption day, inviting families from the neighborhood to meet the animals. Tables were set up with information about each pet, and volunteers helped children learn how to feed, groom, and play safely with the animals. The day was a success. Families left with new pets, neighbors laughed together, and he realized the power of turning conflict into opportunity. The event showed that animals brought people together and created joy, not problems. The HOA could see it too. Though they remained stubborn, they could not ignore the growing support. Every evening he walked home with his dog, reflecting on the changes. The neighborhood felt warmer, friendlier, more connected. People waved from their porches, children ran past with their adopted pets, and he felt a deep sense of pride. His dog trotted beside him, ears perked, happy as ever, as if sensing the difference in the energy around them. Each step reinforced his determination to continue the fight, not just for himself, but for the entire community and the animals he now cared for. At home, he planned his next steps carefully. He wanted to ensure the HOA could not challenge him again easily. He consulted with legal advisors, documented every event, and made sure that the shelter's success and his efforts to follow community rules were clearly visible. Every action was strategic, measured, and intentional. He wanted to be ready for any challenge the HOA might throw at him, confident that he had built a strong foundation of support and evidence. He also focused on improving the shelter itself. Repairs were made to the building, new pens were installed, and the outdoor spaces were landscaped to provide safe play areas for the animals. Volunteers were trained to handle difficult animals, to keep records, and to communicate with visitors effectively. The shelter was no longer struggling. It was thriving. It had become a model for the community, showing what care, compassion, and dedication could achieve. Even the smallest victories mattered. A family that had come to adopt a dog told him how much the experience had changed their perspective on pets. Children who had volunteered now helped with feeding and grooming without supervision. Neighbors who had once questioned the value of the shelter now offered donations or helped spread the word. These small moments built momentum, creating an unstoppable wave of support that the HOA could not ignore. He realized that winning over hearts was more powerful than winning arguments. Despite the growing positive energy, the tension with the HOA lingered. They sent a final notice threatening legal action, fines, and other penalties. He read it carefully, noting that it was the last attempt to assert authority. He was prepared. With documentation, community support, and legal guidance, he knew he could face this head-on. The difference now was confidence. He was no longer fighting alone, and the stakes felt manageable because of the support network he had built. He called a meeting with the HOA board. This time he was calm, collected, and assertive. He explained the positive changes the shelter had brought, the number of animals adopted, the support from neighbors, and the growing public recognition. He presented photographs, records, and testimonials, showing the impact of his actions. The room felt different this time. The board members could no longer ignore the facts. Their authority was still present, but the power dynamic had shifted. He was no longer a lone pet owner under threat. He was a community leader, an advocate, and a problem solver. As the conversation continued, some HOA members softened. They began to acknowledge the value of the shelter and the joy it brought to the neighborhood. While a few remained rigid, the majority started to reconsider their stance. His patience, planning, and dedication were paying off. He had transformed a personal battle into a broader story of community improvement, proving that compassion and action could overcome rigid bureaucracy. Walking back home with his dog that evening, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The struggle was far from over, but the path was clearer now. He had found a way to turn adversity into opportunity, fear into courage, and conflict into community engagement. His dog ran ahead, playful and carefree, a symbol of everything he had fought to protect. The neighborhood was changing too, slowly but surely, becoming a place where rules were balanced with kindness and understanding. He spent the next weeks reinforcing the shelter's programs. Volunteer training, community events, and educational workshops continued. Local schools brought children to learn about animals, neighbors shared their experiences, and word spread about the positive changes. The shelter was now a hub of life and learning, a testament to what could be achieved with vision, perseverance, and love. He felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that his initial struggle had grown into something meaningful for many people and animals. Through it all, his dog remained by his side, a source of comfort, joy, and inspiration. Each playful bark, each nuzzle reminded him of why he had started this journey. He was no longer just defending a pet. He was protecting a vision, building a community, and showing that one person's determination could make a real difference. The bond between him and his dog had never been stronger, and the community's growing respect reinforced the lessons of patience, courage, and compassion. By the end of this part of the story, he had turned the situation completely around. The HOA's attempts to intimidate were weakening, the shelter was thriving, and the community was fully engaged. He had learned that strength came not just from confrontation, but from building support, demonstrating value, and creating positive change. And in the middle of it all, his dog remained the heart of everything. The reason he had started, the reason he had fought, and the reason he would continue to move forward with confidence and hope. The final stage of his journey began quietly, but with a sense of triumph. The shelter had become a beacon in the neighborhood, a place where animals found love and people discovered joy. Volunteers were more committed than ever. Neighbors were involved, and the community had started to see the value of compassion over rigid rules. The struggles with the HOA had not disappeared completely, but they had diminished. He felt a calm determination as he looked at all that had been achieved. One morning, he received a letter from the HOA. His heart sank for a moment, but when he opened it, he realized it was different from the previous notices. This one acknowledged the positive changes in the community, the thriving shelter, and the support he had gathered. The board recognized that their strict enforcement had been counterproductive and promised to respect his rights and his dog. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered with the knowledge that the real victory was not in the letter, but in what he had built over the months. Walking through the shelter, he observed the animals playing in the yard, children laughing as they interacted with them and volunteers busy at work. His dog ran around chasing a ball full of energy and happiness. He felt a deep connection to the place and the animals in it. knowing that each life saved and each bond formed was part of a larger story of care and dedication. The struggles he had faced with the HOA seemed distant now, almost like a test that had led him to something greater. He reflected on how much he had grown. The fight had forced him to be patient, strategic, and empathetic. He had learned to navigate bureaucracy, build community support, and communicate effectively. But more than that, he had learned about resilience, love, and the power of taking action. Each challenge had been an opportunity to prove not just his commitment to his dog, but his ability to create meaningful change in the world around him. The shelter continued to thrive. More animals were adopted each week, volunteers stayed engaged, and the community began to see the shelter as an essential part of neighborhood life. People who had once doubted the value of the initiative now praised the work being done. The shift was remarkable. What had started as a personal struggle to protect his dog had become a story of community improvement, kindness, and cooperation. His initial fear of losing his pet had transformed into a powerful narrative about love and responsibility. Even in small moments, the difference was evident. A family came to adopt a cat, smiling as the children played with it and listened to instructions on care. Neighbors stopped by to volunteer for a few hours, bringing supplies and sharing stories. The local school arranged a field trip to teach students about animal welfare. Each interaction reinforced the impact of what he had done and showed that the fight had been worth it. His dog, always by his side, seemed to understand the happiness surrounding them, tail wagging, eyes bright and full of life. He also continued to educate the community on responsible pet ownership. Workshops, flyers, and casual conversations at the shelter helped people understand the importance of care, compassion, and commitment. The message spread naturally, and he saw neighbors beginning to advocate for animals in their own homes and communities. The positive ripple effect was undeniable. What had begun as a personal fight had become a broader movement that encouraged empathy and responsibility. Despite the victories, he remained vigilant. He knew that complacency could allow problems to return. The HOA was no longer a threat, but he wanted to maintain clear communication and cooperation with them to ensure that such conflicts would not arise again. Regular meetings with community leaders, transparent operations at the shelter, and continued engagement with neighbors were all part of his ongoing strategy. He realized that leadership required responsibility, consistency, and a willingness to listen. He also reflected on the bond with his dog. Their relationship had been the foundation of everything. Each challenge faced, each sleepless night, and each victory had strengthened their connection. The dog had been his companion, his motivator, and his inspiration. He realized that protecting this bond had led him to create something far bigger than himself, a place that gave joy, safety, and hope to countless animals and people alike. The culmination of his efforts came one sunny afternoon. The shelter hosted a community celebration, marking the success of adoption programs and the thriving environment for animals. Families, volunteers, and neighbors came together, enjoying activities, sharing stories, and celebrating the work accomplished. His dog ran through the crowd, playful and happy, a symbol of everything they had fought to protect. He stood back for a moment, observing the scene, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but the outcome was beautiful. In private moments, he often sat with his dog, reflecting on the journey. From the first letter threatening to take his pet, to the creation of a thriving shelter and the engagement of an entire community, the transformation was remarkable. He thought about the lessons learned, the importance of courage, the value of persistence, and the power of turning challenges into opportunities. His dog lay beside him, calm and content, a reminder of why he had started and why he had persevered. Through it all, the shelter became a symbol of what could be achieved when love, determination, and community came together. The neighborhood had changed, becoming more compassionate and engaged. Children learned empathy, neighbors built relationships through shared purpose, and animals found safe, loving homes. The fight that began with a letter from the HOA had grown into a story of hope, resilience, and meaningful impact. He knew the journey was not over. Challenges would come, new issues would arise, and maintaining the shelter's success would require ongoing effort. But he was prepared, strengthened by the experiences he had faced and the support he had gathered. His dog remained at his side, a constant companion and reminder of the love that had sparked the entire journey. Together, They had turned adversity into achievement and personal struggle into community triumph. In the end, the fight for his dog had led to something far greater than he could have imagined. The HOA's threat had sparked a journey that transformed lives, built community connections, and created a lasting impact. Standing in the shelter, surrounded by animals and people, he felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. His dog nuzzled him, and he knew that this was the true reward. The bond they shared had not only survived the challenge, it had inspired change, fostered joy, and created a legacy of compassion and care for the entire community.